Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev. Now, as of this recording, Fall Guys has been a pretty huge success, which, as a fan of both Devolver and Mediatonic, is absolutely awesome. I've yet to play it myself because, well, I've just got so much to do. Like, I'm so busy. Like, seriously, I don't even have time to finish this video. So, Hen, this is totally hypothetical. What is one with no friends and no disposable income to do? Why, make your own single-player version, of course. Which brings us to today's plan. We'll build our own single-player version of one of Fall Guys' minigames. We'll be focusing on the Door Dash minigame today, and just to make things extra spicy, we'll make the process unnecessarily complicated. Totally on purpose. And hopefully by the end we'll have a working example of a single-player version of Fall Guys. Sounds like a plan, so let's get to the coding. First, before starting to record, I doodled up some sprites. A simple Fall Guys-esque sprite for the player/CPU and the doors, which are absolutely going to haunt me in my dreams. Two versions of this horror show exist, one with a door and one without. And with that nightmare seared into your brain as well, let's get to the code. To start, we'd need a couple of arrays to keep track of our data. The first array would determine how many doors per row would be spawned, because I, for some reason, decided this level needed to be loaded in via code. Anyway, for each door spawned, a list was created using a loop. Next came the tedious effort of mapping out the spacing required to spawn each row of doors into the level. Because again, I could have used GameMaker's built-in editor to do this, but I just had to go with the unnecessary challenge of doing it through code. Eventually, I got the numbers right, and we had several rows of doors ready to be messed with. God, those things are really horrifying. Ugh. Anyway, back to the code, I added a new loop to determine door states. Now, before we continue, let me explain my logic behind the door system here. Each row would generate a list and entry for each door. Two entries would then be deleted. These two entries would be the doors with breakable walls. The remaining entries would refer to the solid doors. All this data would then determine the spawn behavior for the doors later. But first, we had to write the initial list code. Using another loop to avoid confusing myself, I once again iterated through the doors and recorded their position to said list. Then I had two random entries deleted from each list. Then in the spawn code for now, I simply switched the door's image index if the entry is missing from the list. I don't know why I randomized the check, which explained why only one open door would spawn. So to keep an eye on the code, I had the door list drawn to the screen. From what I could tell, the list generation was fine. It was the second loop that was the issue. And for roughly an hour, I went through multiple different ways to try translating the list into a proper check for the doors. Each attempt slowly confusing me more than the last, to the point that I wasn't even able to follow my own logic anymore. Again, a major contributing factor to this whole issue was GameMaker's handling of data and the amount of extra work required to do the basics. Seriously, that 2.3 update can't come soon enough. Anyway, at some point I decided to just give up and go with what the code was spitting out: one door per row. Fine, or whatever, at least there was one opening per row. This was still salvageable. I then moved the door spawning code to a script and had the state determine the spawn behavior, which I wrote before I started recording because it was just a lot of math. It ended up being a great idea given the circumstances. Anyway, to complete the course, I added walls to the side of the map to enclose the participants. This also took a while with all the math involved, and at this point, efficiency was the least of my priorities. Walls were added, and with my last bit of sanity, it was time to add the CPU for a solo player to run against. Because my brain was fried at this point, I went with the basic pathfinding for our CPU to navigate the course. I wanted something more advanced, but I was mentally exhausted at this point. So, much like we've done before, the CPU would determine a path to the end of the course, and thus, using GameMaker's pathing, navigate each row of doors. Testing was a failure. Despite adding walls as objects that the pathfinding should keep track of, the pathing refused to work properly. And no matter what I did, and no matter how specific I made the checks, the CPU would just run themselves into the wall in front of them and stop. At this point, I was pretty much done, and not to mention I'd been at this for over 2 hours and I really needed a lunch break. So one lunch break later, I decided to try a Hail Mary. Instead of checking for the objects, I had the walls record the positions to the grid cells like we've done in another recent Let's Dev. Perhaps the object's weird masking was throwing off the pathing? Nope, still broken. Same behavior, no changes. I even converted the motion grid into a data grid, and all things considered, the CPU should have been able to maneuver the course correctly. Something went wrong somewhere, and I was just at wit's end and quit the project there. On one hand, I made this way more difficult for myself than it needed to be. I wanted to challenge myself, but it ended up backfiring in a major way, and now I'm full of regret. I've since become aware of what went wrong, which makes things even more embarrassing. The pathfinding issue, however, I'm not sure if I made an error at some point, and just reviewing the footage currently raises my sodium levels, so I can't say for sure. I do know that I would love to take another crack at this once my ego has healed, and if I did, I'd do it smarter. Well, hopefully smarter. I mean, it never hurts to challenge yourself and try something, even if it's really silly, but this could have been a much more satisfying experiment had I tempered my ambition a bit. Lesson learned. So with that brings us to the end of today's episode of Let's Dev. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and let me know if you'd like to see me return to more Fall Guys cloning in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.